Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Tom Walz, the former director of the School of Social Work at the University of Iowa, is currently the manager and dedicated mentor of the Uptown Bills Small Mall. Tom Walz's philosophy of service and helping those less fortunate has taken him around the world, most notably to the Bowery Soup Kitchen in New York City, as the director of the Peace Corps in Honduras, and to India to edit and research the writings of a well-respected Indian social work educator. For 30 years, Tom conducted travel study seminars to Honduras, Guatemala, and most recently, Mexico. He was a founding member of the Inter-University Consortium on International Social Development and was instrumental in starting the journal Social Development Issues. He lives the maxim to think globally and act locally. In addition to being at Uptown Bills 7 days a week, he is an adjunct professor teaching 2 courses, one on Gandhi and one on gerontology. Tom Walz writes both professionally and creatively on varied subjects such as a biography of Bill Sacker, upside-down welfare, organizational theory and management, sexuality and later life, and just recently a book of short stories entitled Dinner Time Stories. Tom, a native Minnesotan, came to Iowa City in 1973. He and his wife have 6 children. Now today we are filming One of a Kind at Uptown Bills Small Mall. We're here right in the cafe. And before our guest, Tom, gives us a tour and an explanation of this unique mall, we're going to hear his story and how he became the loyal supporter and cheerleader behind this collection of small businesses. For those of you who don't know, Uptown Bills Small Mall offers an outlet for disabled people to work and make an income using their abilities. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
I read that you were born in 1933. Your mother was 16 when she had you. You have 10 siblings, and all but one of your siblings went to college. I think that's quite remarkable.
Well, it was surprising because I was the oldest and the first one to go to college, and I guess, once a pattern is set, of course, then the culture had changed, and, college became a way of life for most kids, and many kids at least.
The one sibling that didn't go to college is the one with Down syndrome. His name is John?
John.
And is he still?
John is no longer alive. He lived 57 years, which was remarkable for someone with Down syndrome, and he lived at home most of his life. As my parents aged, they decided to put him in a residential center, and he lived out his life there.
Your mother was quite an influence on your life, was she not?
I think so, although I actually was raised by my grandparents until I was 7, and so I had to get reacquainted, but when you have a big family, you're sort of a caretaker, and if you're the oldest, you're changing a lot of diapers, right?
Leader of the group. You went on to a small Catholic college, St. John's.
Right.
And then what happened in your story? Then you went off to...
Well, I got drafted after graduation, and I was sent to Germany.
What were you doing? I read in Bavaria?
Well, I ended up, we were part of the occupation forces after World War II, and I ended up in a village not far from where my paternal grandparents had come from the Schwabisch Mund. And so it was a wonderful place to discover your background, you know, at least 1/4 of it.
So after your time in Germany, or Bavaria, you enrolled at St. Louis University,
Right.
which is a Jesuit, and you got your degree there
Right.
in
Social work.
social work.
And then I worked for a little while at the St. Louis State Hospital, and then decided I didn't know my younger brothers and sisters. They had all sort of been born after I was almost emancipated from the home, and went back to Minneapolis and started a program for aftercare for mentally ill people, and got reacquainted with my family.
What did that experience teach you?
Well, I really found out that I had to direct things. You know, I was sort of inevitably in charge of something, and so as a very young social worker, I was the administrator, but I was everything. I was a one-person agency with about 200 clients, and but it taught me, you know, fundraising and so on. But I also, you know, found myself in the 60s too. You know, I mean, things were heating up, and you know, my politics were such that I was going to be
became an
involved.
activist?
Right.
And is that when you decided to go on for your PhD at the University of Minnesota?
I don't know. I have no idea what my motivation was. I mean, should not have been, because there was no career push anywhere, either from my immediate family or my family of origin or my background. And I don't know why I decided to do that, but I did. And I wish I could explain it to you.
In 1973, you came to the University of Iowa as
Right.
the director of the School of Social Work. And did you have a family at that time?
Yeah, we had, when I had sort of completed my coursework at the University of Minnesota, it was about 1961, I took a job with Peace Corps, directing Peace Corps in Honduras.
Yeah, let's talk about that part
From
of your
62
story.
to 64. And then when I got back, I taught at the University of Minnesota to write a dissertation, and got hooked into teaching, and you know, one thing led to another, and I will end up here as director of the School of Social Work.
Let's go back to the
Okay.
Peace Corps. Here you were raised in northern Minnesota. This must have been the most mind-boggling experience to be in Honduras for 3 years, correct?
Well, I think the only thing that mitigated that a little bit was my military experience. You know, I had never been anywhere until then. But, you know, 11 days on a troop ship and living in a small village in Germany, I kind of acclimated to cultural differences and life overseas and so on. But I'd never been south of the border ever in my life when I took that job in Peace Corps, so I had to fake most of it. I couldn't speak Spanish worth a darn. And
How did you get to be in
I don't know. I think
the Peace Corps volunteers? If you couldn't
Sergeant
speak-
Shriver at that time must not have been knowing what he's doing, but I never understood why they hired me. Ida never hired me. But I was very successful at it. It really worked well for me. And Honduras was just an easy country to work in, and I loved it. And I had...
Why did you love it? What
I
was it
loved the
about that you loved?
challenge of it. You felt very alive every day. There was only 100 miles of pavement in the country, and I'd get out of my Jeep and have to go out and visit volunteers and, you know, do my job and bounce around and in the wilderness. And, you know, it had an aspect of adventure and romance to it that you just can't find in a manicured life anymore, you know, and it was a tremendous challenge. I loved it.
What were your volunteers doing? Were they digging wells, or
No,
what was their job?
our
that-
first group was public health nurses. We were setting up clinics and starting the first school of nursing in the country of Honduras. And the remainder were social workers, and we were setting up community centers in the slum areas, in the, the squatter areas of the several cities that were there. Honduras wasn't very urban, but you know, and it was fascinating. Then we had well drillers, and we had road builders and everything. Today they do mainly ecology work and, you know, that sort of thing.
You wrote that your 3-year Peace Corps rotation greatly contributed to your philosophy of life and your actions. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely, yeah. It really set the stage for what I wanted to do in my life, and it sort of radicalized me. You know, a lot of the myths about, or a lot of the realities about American imperialism were brought home to me as I saw that poor little country kind of having a lot of its riches taken away by large corporations and others that were situated in the industrialized world, parts of the world, especially the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you wrote that capitalism, let me see if I've got that right, at the international level lacked any commitment to justice and equality.
Well, you know, that's being a little harsh, but I think there's a tendency within the global economic world to realize that what they really want to achieve is the bottom line. I mean, to make money for their stockholders. So, you know, as they spread the gospel of economic development, it has a basic self-interest that motivates it.
Sure. How important to your story was your relationship with the Indian social worker, educator named, I think I've got this right, Sugata Dasgupta?
Well, Dasgupta was a wonderful man.
Yeah, tell
I
us
didn't
this
get to know
story.
him. I mean, I brought him home as a visiting faculty member when I was director, and he was with us just for a week, but we developed an interesting relationship, and we were going to do a project later on. Anyway, one thing led to another, and he sort of disappeared from my life, and then I got a call from his son that he had died suddenly in Australia, where he was actually in exile from Indira Gandhi had kind of driven him out of the country, and India. And the son told me that he had named me in his last will and testament to dispose of his writings. So that ended up bringing me to India and to
Was
his...
had been a prolific writer?
He had been a very prolific writer, but he hadn't published much in English. So I took it upon myself to ghostwrite his material, rewrite his material, and get it into a form that could be published in English. And I did a little of that. And, but it also connected me to Gandhi. He had been the director of the Gandhian Institute of Social Science in Benares for 16 years. So I ended up doing my work in India and discovering a Gandhi archive and discovering a very compatible philosopher that motivated me tremendously from then on.
Why was he in exile?
Well, he was a Bengali, which meant he was in the sort of the communist sector, but he was probably a critic of government, and Indira Gandhi was kind of a tough old lady, and she wasn't too much for, you know, freedom of speech.
One time when you were in India, you had the rare privilege of meeting Mother Teresa.
Yeah, on the second visit, when I went to give a lecture, they had an annual Dasgupta lecture, and I went to give it in Calcutta, and I brought some students and friends with me, and we just decided one day to go see if we could find Mother Teresa, and lo and behold, we did, and had a nice conversation.
Tell the story about it. It's a wonderful story.
Well, it's a sad story for me. It's a story that sort of indicates my shortcomings. We were on our way to the Mother Teresa mother house and saw an Indian woman lying in the sun. It was a terribly hot day, naked and frothing from the mouth. And I didn't know what to do. And the woman with me had been a former nun, and we looked at each other and said, well, what do we do? And I said, well, I try to kind of take my cues from the culture. And the culture was just walking around this woman, so well, maybe we shouldn't bother. I don't know what's going on. Anyway, we walked around her, ended up with Mother Teresa, and I told Mother Teresa's story and said, you know, I have this sort of strange feeling about I didn't do this right. And she said, you sure didn't. She said, you go, you know, and she called her two young nuns to go pick up this woman and bring her to her shelter and take care of her, you know. And she wasn't scolding me, but she was laughing. And she said, what do you mean culture? There's only one culture, and it's the culture of kindness. It's a culture of, you know, humanness. you take care of one another.
So that's
That was
quite
a good
quite
lesson.
a good lesson and quite a memory to have
Right.
of this woman. Getting back before we move on to the mall, about you went back to Honduras about 10 years ago and took a study group, and you must have seen great changes from the time you were the director of the Peace Corps in Honduras. What were some of the most blaring changes?
Well, I wrote a piece on this, about a retrospective, a 30-year retrospective on my visit to Honduras, because all of a sudden there was homelessness, there was AIDS was rampant, poverty that I'd never seen, children who were lying on the street from glue sniffing and were just left to lie. You just had the feeling of decline, of economic decline and decay. And I tried to understand it, and I had known a village there very well, and so I wrote a story about how the village had changed. It had been a subsistence village of black people, the Garifuna, who were former slaves, and who had made a life on the seacoasts fishing. And they lived simply, and they lived very healthfully, and they were wonderful people. Just, they lived a very joyful life, almost romantic. And so as industrialization, or as the change moves in, as the world became a global village, the fruit companies began to hire them to cut bananas, and then shortly after that they mechanized the banana cutting, so the men went off to work on ships to take bananas all over the world, and then the airplane replaced the ship, and they were left with nothing, and they ended up only being good linguists, so they immigrated to, or legally or illegally, all over the world, and left their village, right, and just developed this remittance economy where they send a few dollars back, and the village just died. It decayed, and drugs and alcohol and AIDS became just epidemic. It was sad, you know, it was in 30 years. And so, you know, for me, being a bit of a critic of the sort of global industrial hocus pocus, I never got real happy with it. You know, this was an example of me, of this, that somehow, whatever we call this modernization trend, this expansion of capitalism, was coming at tremendous cost to many people around the world.
Do you think it's changed any in the last 10 years?
Well, certainly not with the jihad that we're seeing around the world. I don't think so. I think, if anything, it's penetrating more deeply into areas it has never touched, and causing the kind of abreaction or reaction from groups that are deeply affected by it, whose values are assaulted, and you know, and of course you develop the Western appetite for things, and materialism is an easy thing to convert people to. So,
well, I see this imprint in your life of your experiences in the Peace Corps, like you mentioned in Honduras, the writings of your friend, a colleague, Gandhi's writing and philosophy. I think perhaps having a Down syndrome brother. And now it brings me to this place, Uptown Bill's small mall. You've acted and thought globally, but you've also acted locally. And I want you to tell our viewers, why Iowa Cityans should know about this place and what's important for them to know.
Well, let me just say that my main motivation, I think, was getting to know Bill Sachter, after whom we're named.
Okay, yeah. For some people who don't know about Bill.
Bill was the epitome of the good man, of the nonviolent human being, of what Gandhi would call the man with ahimsa, that just loved. And I was so moved by him, even though he was mentally retarded, that it just became a role model for me. And I just said that the biggest thing that I have to do in my life, I'm never going to be a great writer or a great academic or anything else, but what I could do is to keep his story alive and to retell it, and to get the community to deeply appreciate what this man did. And so we kept Bill's Coffee Shop alive over on the campus, and it's still there, Wild Bill's Coffee Shop. And then when I retired, I said, well, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? You know, I'm not a golfer, and I'm not this and that. So I will open up this small mall where people with disability can own as well as operate businesses and interact with the community, and you know, you would have this kind of communication, this discovery of a kind of a talent that's often neglected or unseen or undiscovered in a community like ours. And so anyway, that's why we did Uptown Bill's Small Mall. And there were a couple of people that were over at the other old coffee shop who were being asked to leave because they weren't paying rent and this and that. And I had worked with them for a long time, and I just felt we really needed to grow old together. And so they came over here and were the first of the business owners.
Can you just, before we talk
Yeah.
about the different businesses, give just a small little brief biography of Bill? And
Okay. Well, Bill, as you know, spent a half century in a state hospital for the mentally retarded. They called them idiots and imbeciles in those days. And he was admitted at age 7, or involuntarily committed at age 7, and he was there for 44 years. And when he got out, he pretty much was neglected until this college student met him, and the college student befriended him, became his guardian. The college student was my student. And so
in
one thing
Minnesota.
in Minnesota. And so when I came to Iowa, I brought the college student who brought Bill. We had to give Bill a job, and you know, so that's how Bill's Coffee Shop got started, and how I met Bill. And then we sort of, in the next 8 years, saw him daily and just grew to admire this man, as many did in Iowa City. He is really, truly one of our famous Iowans.
Let's talk about the mall here, where
Yeah.
we're recording this interview. Tell viewers where we are right here.
Okay, we're at 401 South Gilbert, right
Okay.
next to the sanctuary, many people will
Yes.
know. And it's on Gilbert and Court Street. And we have a building. It's a little different structure of a mall in which you enter from the Gilbert Street side. You'll come into a coffee shop that's owned and operated by one group of people. And then you go into a bookstore, Bill's Book Mart, that's owned and operated by another group of people. And then you walk through, and we'll see this on film in a minute,
Sure.
Antique collectible shop. Then we have a big music venue where we have musical performances and rent space for other meetings.
When the musicians come to perform,
Right.
do they pay to perform, or it's just a free
No,
space?
we pay them to perform.
Oh, you
really.
pay them to perform.
I wish we got paid to do. You know, it's a service.
It's a service.
Yeah,
okay.
to a lot of the musicians, and it's an alcohol-free space. So we're trying to be part of the Stepping Up program and to provide an alternative for late night
Sure.
music in Iowa City. And then we have a little computer graphics shop where we do business cards, flyers, and so on. Downstairs we have an art gallery and a big meeting space where we do a lot of work with the AA community in Iowa City. And then we have another shop called Akibuland, or Land of Africa, just opened up.
Just
which
open.
is-
You
yeah.
showed me, and it's have some
Right.
beautiful things.
Right. And it's all imported from a single village in Senegal, which we know and have a responsibility to. It's a nonprofit organization that is basically trying to support the people that are doing all this handwork.
So if I buy something there, all the
Profits
go
right.
to.
We have to use enough to keep the shop going,
Sure.
but and to import. But outside of that, yes.
Well, how do you get your funding? That's the there.
Well, Mother
lies
Teresa
the
had a
rub.
thing. Well, you know, you beg and you borrow and you work hard. We do a lot of work, physical work actually, to earn. We have a new program off-site where we're doing furniture refinishing and home improvement work. So we get contracts to do painting and floor refinishing, and those are more profitable. They bring more income in, and we use that income. A lot of us who work there are just volunteers.
How do people know, excuse me, how do people know about your refinishing business?
Right now, we try not to advertise it too much.
Because you're so busy?
Well, we do most of the refinishing for our antique shop.
Oh, okay.
But then we'll sell some out at auctions and this kind of thing to generate a cash flow. But we probably earn, just through labor, apart from the stores, about 50% of our income. And then we get a nice subsidy from the City of Iowa City through a federal grant that helps us with our rent and utilities. They've helped us a lot the first 3 years, and we hope to be self-supporting this, or get half that subsidy the second 3 years. We're coming into our end of our third year. And then I try to build up an endowment fund that we can use to partially internally subsidize, because this place will never be able to be totally income self-sufficient. We just don't get enough foot traffic. If the community wanted to help us, they could just come in and be patrons.
There you go.
We got wonderful products, wonderful people, but they're a little reluctant to come, and I don't know whether the wheelchairs bother people or scare them off or what, but they'll find it a wonderful place.
And aren't you head of a foundation, Dream?
The Extend the Dream Foundation is the nonprofit that sponsors this program.
Okay.
And we also do several other projects. We're doing a major documentary on Bill Sachter that a young filmmaker by the name of Elaine Wyrick is doing. And we also help to monitor, supervise, or administer the Sachter House, which is a universally designed home for handicapped people here in Iowa City.
Where is that?
On 1821 B Street. It's a very well-known house, and two of our owners are the owners of this house. One is wheelchair bound, the other is not. And
Well, I read recently in the newspaper about that you've gone to the city too to ask for additional
right,
funding.
we just got approved
Did you
for
get-
additional funding for the
Good.
next 3 years, but it's only 50% funding, and these rents are very difficult, very expensive when you get into the downtown properties. So we're going to have to raise probably about $2,000 a month rent that won't be subsidized, apart from the other maintenance costs, you know, your internet fees, your telephone fees, your insurance, your this and that. It's not easy, and so I'm constantly on trying to find groups to talk to and selling bill books, or we call them bill books, my upside down celebrity books, and just hoping that we get a few benefactors that come along, and the community has been quite generous. Those that know us
Sure.
love us, you know, so it's a matter of reaching others.
And people can stop here on the
Anytime.
way to work and have a cup of coffee?
This is the only place I know, I think, apart from maybe Coral Ridge does the same. We're open 365 days a year,
My goodness.
8 to 8,
8 to 8.
minimally,
So-
and on music nights, 8 to 11.
And I see you have water to buy and Pepsi and different
We have
soft
everything.
drinks.
We have
and-
everything. We're only licensed as a convenience store, so I can't give you eggs and bacon,
No,
but
but,
everything else we can do. We have 60 varieties of tea, and we always have Amish pies and cookies.
And cookies.
But it's a wonderful place to come and sit, to study, to bring your card groups in. You know, people are anxious to have just people around.
Sure.
Nobody asks you to buy anything. And a lot of the homeless, of course, aren't in a position to buy. We usually have to buy them coffee.
So they stop in
They'll
here.
stop in
It's a
because
warm
we're
place.
in a high incident, you know, area of homelessness. As you know, a lot of people live under the bridge there.
Sure.
And
There's one part of your story I didn't ask you about. You have 6 children, like I
Right.
said in the introduction. Tell me a bit about them and where they are.
okay, well, I have 6 children. My oldest is an attorney in Des Moines. He has a couple of children, and his wife is a partner in a large insurance firm. They're doing very well. I have a daughter in Chicago who's an attorney, and her husband is a high school teacher. They have 2 children. They're doing quite well. I have another daughter in Chicago who's an attorney.
My
and,
goodness.
Yeah, and she's into real estate, and they buy and sell properties. Her husband's an engineer. She has 3 wonderful children, and you know, they're doing fine. I have a son well, I have another son, the fourth of my natural children, who's the director of admissions at a college in Hammond, Indiana. And then my two youngest children are adopted Native American children, and one is a waiter in Chicago and has been in Chicago most of his life, and the other works for me here. He's a painter, and he has a child, a lovely grandchild here. So that's
How
it.
old were they when you adopted them?
They were babies. They were
Babies.
just, one was 4 weeks, and then the other was about 4 months.
And you have how many grandchildren?
We have 8.
8 grandchildren. I don't know when you sleep. You're refinishing furniture, you're down here, you're teaching. Have you enjoyed your teaching? You're being an adjunct professor?
Yeah, I just, in fact, I think I finally become a good teacher. I've enjoyed it immensely. I teach a course on Gandhi to freshmen in a seminar thing, so I only have 15. And then I teach a course on public policy and the elderly. And then this spring semester, I'll be teaching at the Senior Center. I'll teach a course on Gandhi and a course on sexuality. So,
What do
you
young students want to know about Gandhi? What is...
I think they're really struggling with their own value system. You know, most of them have grown up. You know, a lot of my students come out of Chicago suburbs, and they're pretty middle class, pretty comfortable, and pretty much accepting the life's definition that they've been given. And they realize it's not really fulfilling, that there's something more meaningful that's hidden to them. And Gandhi kind of opens that up a little bit, or at least opens up a dialogue on it.
Well, who do you think imprinted you the most about that life is to give back and to help others?
I have no idea.
It just kind of evolved as you had your experiences?
There was a nun that I worked with when I was in my grade school, early high school. There was an English teacher I had in a Catholic high school that really sent me to college. I didn't intend to go to college at all. And Bill, Mother Teresa scooped a million people. I was always in search of good people. I sort of had a hunger for it. I suppose that's in some ways how I met and married my wife. She was one of those authentically good human beings. And so you look for, you just have a hunger for it. And I didn't like people who were on the make or didn't have a real strong ethic. And so I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say.
It's a mystery.
Yeah.
Tom, thank you.
Okay, well,
And we
thank you for this opportunity. It's fun to tell your story.
It's wonderful.
I wish everybody in Iowa City could. I've always been bothered by the fact that I meet so many Iowa Cityans that ought to be sitting here rather than me, whose stories are much, much more profound than mine.
But everyone
I
has
know.
a story. You surely know from here that everyone has
I
a
know.
story to tell. And so it was really, really good to hear your story,
Well,
Tom.
thank you.
My guest on One of a Kind is Tom Walz, retired director of the School of Social Work, coordinator and manager of Uptown Bill's Small Mall, and adjunct professor at the University of Iowa. Tom's major influences on his life are his religious beliefs, his upbringing with a Down syndrome brother, a mother who taught him that the purpose of life is to help others, his 3 years in the Peace Corps, travels abroad studying the writings of Gandhi, meeting Mother Teresa, touching students' lives. He has touched many lives. His students, like I said, the homeless, the disenfranchised, the people who need support and who desire a sense of family. Tom Walz is one of a kind.